Okay, hi, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the LPEA Town Hall. We are super excited that you guys are all here. I want to take a moment and thank everybody who took time out of their evening and their family time to join this town hall. In particular, I want to thank all the board members who are joining us this evening, as well as all the attendees. And I want to take an extra moment to thank all of the staff, not just for making time to participate in the town hall, but also for the 2+ years of hard work that have led to this moment in time. We are super grateful for everything that you guys have done for this community, and are incredibly proud to be at this, I don't think it would be an overstatement to say, historic juncture in the history of Durango. So without any further comments, I'd like to get straight into it. As some of you may know, LPEA has been exploring our options regarding future power supply for more than 2 years, primarily with an eye towards sourcing affordable, reliable, and low carbon electricity to power for our communities. This is the third in a recent series of town halls on this topic, and the last town hall we will have before the board will vote on a path forward at our board meeting next week. Today, Dan Harms, our LPEA's VP of Grid Solutions, will give an overview of where we are currently standing in this process. We're also pleased to welcome Pat Bridges with us again, the Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of TriState, who will be presenting a slide from the TriState side of things. So thank you, Pat, for taking the time out of your evening to join us. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will open the floor for questions. So feel free to type in your questions at any time in the QA box at the bottom of your Zoom interface. We'll then answer those questions live during the QA section. For those of you that are calling in on a phone or don't have access to the QA section, you can also send your questions to comments at lpea.coop. That's comments, C-O-M-M-E-T-S, at lpea.coop. And we will add them to the queue. So without further ado, I will hand this over to Dan to start the presentation. Dan, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, John. Let me get my screen shared here. Presentation. Flip that around. Looking good, Drew? Yep, you got it. All right. Good deal. Yeah, as John mentioned earlier, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here at this junction and giving you a final update here before we move to the board meeting next week. And so if you've joined us for the past town hall meetings, you'll see some of the information that we presented before and a few little extra nuggets in there that we want to present to you today and give you a full picture and answer any questions you might have, and get everybody in a comfortable state on where we're heading with our future of power supply. So our objectives tonight, we're going to recap some of that background of LPEA's power supply explorations to date, get you catch up in case you haven't joined us in the last couple of town hall meetings. We'll also cover some of the information that was presented in those, and then we'll respond to your questions so that our board will have all the information they could possibly have going into this February 16th meeting. This is what our agenda looks like tonight. We'll cover that background and tell you a little bit about where we are today, and then what this can mean for you as far as any kind of savings that might come out of this. Talk about our next steps, and then finally we'll get to those questions and answers. So as many of you might be aware, LPEA does have a strategic goal that we've had for since early 2019 that talks about what we want to do with our carbon footprint and how we want to cut that by 50% by the year 2030. All doing this while keeping member rates lower than 70% of our Colorado peers. And that 70% number was selected because that's where we were standing. So another way of saying this is that we want to cut our carbon footprint in half without raising any rates to do so. So this slide describes why we put so much focus on our purchase power. That is, as you can see from this pie chart here, it's 64% of the total cost of what you pay for your power bill. So the more we can do to control that side of the expense, the lower we can make the power delivered to your house. That equates to $68 million annually that we pay in purchase power expense. So even a 1% cut in that makes a big, big difference. And that is the #1 driver of all of our expenses. So in 2019, our board developed a 3-pronged strategy on how we were going to proceed with power supply. So there's 3 efforts here that we're going to put equal vigor on. And the first one was to look for flexibility in our current contract with TriState. So work with TriState, work with our power supply committees and the rate committees to determine what we could do to gain any extra flexibility. And I'm happy to report that through doing these efforts, we were able to acquire, along with the other cooperatives of part of the TriState cooperative system, to get that extra ability to put in an extra 2 megawatts of solar through a community solar project. And that is something we look forward to being able to do here in the near future. As part of these negotiations, there was also a 4% decrease in the wholesale rates. That 2% came this last year that we were able to pass on to our members in the form of capital credits. And then the next 2% will be coming this coming year. The other path that we've been looking at is the partial contract path. And with this, this is an option whereby we still remain a member of TriState, but we're able to go and secure at least half of our power from another source. And that's the one that we've been talking about a lot lately, and the one that we'll be putting a lot of focus on with tonight's presentation. Then the final and third prong of the strategy was a full exit that we've been exploring as well. And through that, it involved a lot of work at FERC and in determining what that contract termination payment or a full exit cost would be. And that's where that sits today. There's a lot of discussions going on at the FERC level to determine where that is. We've got a little bit of insight into that now, which allows us to move on to this next step in determining which option is truly the best for La Plata Electric to focus efforts on today. Now, I do want to point out that we are not abandoning any one of these 3 prongs. We're just picking one that we feel is the right path to take forward and focus on today, but we're absolutely not eliminating any one of these 3 going forward. So to tell you a little bit about the partial contract structure, in October of 2020 was when TriState, through the help of its members cooperatives, developed a partial contract policy to allow a member to go and acquire 50% of its power supply from another power supplier. That new policy that TriState was able to develop will allow cooperatives like La Plata Electric who want this kind of flexibility to diversify our portfolios. Then TriState agreed, and both TriState and the LPEA agreed to partial contract buy down terms, and that is all subject to FERC approval. And so that'll be coming up, and we'll give you more details on that here coming. Now, as we get into this, there's going to be some information that we can share, but there's going to be some information that we can't quite share with our membership yet. That's because this whole process is still under FERC review and FERC negotiations and settlements right now. And so we're wanting to share as much with you as we possibly can, but I want you to rest assured that we have spent a tremendous amount of time with our board of directors, your elected officials, to thoroughly review all the information in detail. Even this information we can't quite share with you yet. The board has been able to get privileged information and review all this. And so we've spent several years looking at this, and definitely in the last week or so, we've spent several hours in heavy detail going through all this information. And so we'll provide what we can show you on the savings on that today. So where we are today and what we know now is that LPEA and TriState have both agreed on the final partial contract payment arrangement, a lot of the parameters around that. And that will then need to be submitted to FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they are the ones who would have the final approval on that. But I'm glad to announce that TriState and LPEA have definitely come to an agreement on what these terms should look like, and hopefully that'll be able to get submitted to FERC here pretty soon. Then the other piece of information that we have, I mentioned that the full buyout has been progressing through FERC, and there are competing methodologies that are out there. And so there's one solution that gives a best case low end solution or low end payment that a cooperative would have to pay to exit TriState, and there's another solution that is on the higher end. And so there's a range that sits out there that gives us the ability to say, well, this would be the best case LPA could look at, and that's what we're judging some of the information when we start looking at full buyouts on. Now, when we look at this full buyout, there's other costs that need to be included in that when we look at that aspect of it. Because with the partial, we're still a member of TriState, and so we still have access to a lot of the benefits and services that TriState provides. But if we do a full exit, we also need to include the cost of transmission access, operational communications, regulatory compliance, energy efficiency, and rebates. These are some of the services that TriState provides us today that would be included if we do a partial. But like I said, if we did a full buyout, these are extra costs that we add into the analysis when we look at that as well. So our path down this partial contract, I wanted to catch you up, and a lot of this is information that was presented at the last town hall meetings. But where we were at that point was we were just at the stage of selecting a partner. And shown in this chart over here, it shows that Crossover Energy Partners was the one that we selected. And that came as a result of a rigorous evaluation of 9 different proposals that were given to us in the form of a request for proposals that we sent out to many different power suppliers. Crossover was selected to supply La Plata Electric with 71 megawatts, which is half of our capacity. And then the remainder will be provided by TriState. Then as part of this agreement and everything that we worked through with the partial contract was an agreement on what that payment would be for us to acquire this ability. Because we had a full requirements contract with TriState. So in order to do this, there was a payment that will be made and agreed upon for us to have the ability to move that forward. So here are the big contractual benefits that we see coming as part of a partial contract. Number one here is cost savings and stability. And those are really 2 different things. Cost savings comes in the form of we truly believe that we'll be lowering our cost of purchase power. And what I mean by cost stability is that through our contract with Crossover, we would have the ability to lock in pricing and know what that's going to be coming into the future. And that allows us to protect against inflation. Then environmental benefits. We talked about LPEA's environmental goal out there. This option would allow us to meet that carbon footprint reduction of 50% immediately upon signing this contract with the power supply that we would be able to get from Crossover there. Then in regards to reliability and resiliency, that is something I know is top of mind of a lot of our members out there. So I certainly want to hit on that. The key thing with a partial contract is that we still are a member of TriState's transmission system. We still are 100% member of that. And so we have access to TriState's reliable transmission grid that's provided us service in the past. Then in addition to that, we're also going to have access to new regional generation resources that are going to be located maybe more centralized to La Plata Electric and maybe less reliant upon that transmission system. And then our partners through this partial contract could also bring additional transmission assets. So if anything, we stand to gain on this reliability and resiliency aspect of our partial contract. Then the last thing I want to point out as a benefit is the community commitment portion of this. And that is through our contract with Crossover, we're looking to provide an extra $1 million into the community in the form of educational grants. Then in addition to that, a lot of these projects we built locally within our service territory, local jobs doing local projects. Now I want to dig a little deeper on the savings aspects of this. The blue bars are the same chart that we showed you last time during our town hall meeting, showing that we can be saving near almost $7 million a year, and as we go forward with a partial contract here. Now, what's shown by the orange bars is the best case of what we could be looking at if we were to do a full exit. And so right now, as things stand today, with what's being presented at FERC, the partial exit looks like a much better option for LPA to move forward with. Now, in the future, there may be other circumstances that change. I just wanted to reiterate that we are not taking a full buyout off the table in the future. That'll still be there. So to summarize those savings that we were looking at on that previous slide, we could be seeing $7 million on average each year in savings. And that would total to $35 million in that first 5 years. And over the full 20-year contract period, we'd be looking at $140 million. Now I'd like to turn this over to Pat. Are you with us there, Pat?
Yes, I am.
All right. And Pat, can you see that slide?
I can. Yes, thank you.
All right. I'll turn it over to you then.
Thank you. And I just want to take first off, just congratulate LPEA for being the looks on this schedule, at least looks to be the first of TriState's 42 cooperative members to become a partial supply customer, which is quite an achievement. And I also want to thank the LPEA staff, our relationship in working through this, and we didn't always agree on everything, but we got there and have a settlement. I think we all agree it's a good one. Now we should move forward and get the FERC approval on that. I think the question some people might have is, how can this be a good thing for TriState when in essence we are losing revenue? We're losing sales that we have traditionally provided to LPEA that they'll be procuring from another source. But to understand that, you look at what our goals are, and we have, a kind of a 4-point mission statement, but 2 of those objectives, one is provide our members more flexibility in their power supply. This definitely does that. And like I said, LPEA is on the leading edge of that. But secondly, and very importantly to us, and also consistent with your goals, is to provide a more responsible source of energy. You may be aware that TriState has traditionally generated a majority of its energy from coal-fired power plants. We have in the past few years closed several plants already. We have announced future closures of other units with a goal of decarbonizing dramatically over the rest of this decade. And in that process, then we replace those coal plants with primarily renewable resources, primarily large wind and solar projects. And actually this move by LPEA here actually allows us to move a little faster in that regard. Ability to accelerate the closure of a coal plant, possibly to move us a little further down the road in meeting our decarbonization goals, as well as or similar to what LPEA has. So it is a win-win. There are obviously some upfront costs to TriState in this transition, but that's where we do have this buy down payment, which helps offset those. And so we're excited about this and wish you guys the best of luck and moving forward. And obviously we'll still be with you all the way with providing the services that Dan has talked about. So I think it's very good news for all of us. So thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Pat. Thanks for joining us there. So now we'll move on, and don't have a whole lot of slides left here, so we'll get ready for your questions, but we'll be moving on to what this could mean for you as one of our members of La Plata Electric. So these savings do represent a significant reduction in LPA's expenses. And after this transition, this could result in the following for you. And what I want to look back at is try to quantify this a little bit. We were talking about $7 million in savings a year potentially through this. And at the very onset of the presentation, we talked about how much our power supply cost us in the form of 64 million. So a $7 million savings out of 64 is a significant move for us. So it's definitely something to look forward to. Now, one might think that, oh, our rates are going to immediately go down when this happens. That is an option, but there's other options that could occur as well. And until that occurs and our board actually votes on how to handle these savings that can be coming our way, there's a question mark there on which one of these options might be best, or there might be a fifth option out there. But those could certainly be in the form of a rate decrease. It could be in the form of holding rates flat well into the future to stave off inflation. Or it could be an increase of capital projects that lead towards more fire mitigation and improved reliability. Or there could be increased capital credits to the members. Or it could be a combination of those things as well. So lots of options out there. Bottom line is you are a member of our cooperative. These savings are your savings. Now, as we move on to our next steps and how we're going to proceed from here, the very next thing is going to be our LPA board will meet on Wednesday and vote on this path forward. Then LPA will finalize its contracts with both Crossover and TriState. We've got term sheets in place. We've agreed in principle on what these parameters and terms look like. And now there's a few more steps to hammer out the details, secure the various power supply options, and finalize those contracts. And then after that, it would move on to FERC, where they would approve that buy down payment. Then LPA will also, as we're doing this, stay involved in the full buyout proceedings, and we'll keep an eye on that to make sure that that is a fair shake for all of us as other cooperatives negotiate that aspect of it. And then finally, the board will vote to approve the final power supply contracts. That will be coming closer towards the end of this year. And then we look forward to completing the transaction sometime in the next couple of years here, where we'll be taking power from this new power supply option here. Now, as we wrap it up, we're getting to that Q&A portion here. I do want to point out that we have had a lot of questions that have come from previous town hall meetings. Those have been captured in a Q&A section on our power supply section within our web page there. That's the web address that you could go to look at what maybe some of those previous questions were, but glad to answer any questions that you might have coming up here. I'll go ahead and stop the presentation here. Turn it back over.
Great. Thanks, Dan and Pat, for that great presentation. That was awesome. So I think now the best thing to do is to hand the floor over to Hillary, LPA's VP of Hillary Knox, LPA's VP of Member Experience, to quarterback the Q&A section. So have at it.
Right, excellent. So just as a reminder, there are two ways that you guys can pose questions to us for us to answer live. You can either click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom console and type in your question there, or if you're maybe joining on the phone or can't see that Q&A function for some reason, you can also email at comments, COMMENTS @lpea.coop. So without further ado, let's get going. Looks like we have around 11 questions in the queue so far. I'm going to start with a question from Tom Basham. How were the estimated savings on the savings slide, Dan? So that was the blue and orange chart. How were those determined? And what drives higher and lower savings in different years?
Great question, Tom. So in those savings, of course, we're comparing it against something to say we're saving. So we're comparing it against where we feel that TriState rates would be going. And those were determined by TriState's long-term financial forecast. And so in using that, and the reason why they might be going up and down, because at various years, TriState might have a slight decrease or level rates, or they might have an increase. And that's all based on their 20-year forecast there. So that's why things move up and down a little bit, because the pricing that we'll have from Crossover will be fixed in a steady trajectory through there. Then the other elements that go into calculating that savings, that absolutely what's included in there is the financing and paying off of that buy down payment, the partial contract payment that gets associated with that. It's also going to include any kind of, obviously the rate by which we'll be purchasing replacement power. It does include the transmission access. I mentioned we'd still be 100% transmission member of TriStates. So we absolutely have all the transmission costs rolled into that. And what's not included in there is what I mentioned would be included in the full buyout, which are the services that TriState would still maintain and still serve us with. So we didn't have to include those in it.
Great. All right, the next answer is from Lawrence. What assurance is there that the power supplied by Crossover is from a renewable resource?
That's a great question too. So when renewable energy is generated, they have renewable energy tags that get associated with it, and that's tracked through the system. And so we can always go back and make sure, and we will be asking for this assurance every year of how that happens. There's also a third-party verification system that tracks the renewable energy credits. LPEA will be assigned all the renewable energy credits that get created from the generation that comes from these projects. And so at the end of the year, we'll have that total tally of total renewable energy credits and know exactly what that number is.
Great. Next question is from Gwyn. What is your best projection on when we might actually be partially bought out?
All right, good question, Gwen. Our best, estimate on when that occurs, because they still have to come to agreements. They actually have to physically build the resources to serve us. But we're aiming and hoping for about January 2024 at this point.
All right, here's another question on Crossover from Lou. Can you please give some background on Crossover, power resources, liability, service area, other customers, construction plans? Maybe Dan, like where they can go for some more information.
Very good. Lou, I'd say one of the good places to start, obviously, is Crossover's website. You'll see that they are a part of KKR, the financial firm. So they've got very, very solid backing there. And Crossover was previously went under the name of Aravon. And so if you're lacking information by looking at Crossover, you can also look at Aravon. They'll have the full list of projects. We have that kind of full list of projects and the proposals they gave us. We've talked to previous clients of theirs and have a really good relationship built there.
All right, the next question.
Can you spell Airlon for folks?
Arevon.
All right, the next question is from Dick. What would be the duration of the partial contract with TriState and the partial contract with Crossroads? Are they both 20 or Crossover? Are they both 20 years?
So our agreement with TriState will be a continuation of the existing wholesale agreement. It will be replaced, but the termination date will still be the same. It still goes through the year 2050. So it's not a term as much as a termination date. And so that's closer to a 28-year contract for continuation we have with them. With Crossover, so you're asking for the duration, it would be a 20 years, the option that we're looking at today.
Right, the next one is from Alan. I'm not sure, Dan, if you want to punt this one to Carl or if you guys want to share it. But his question is, you are spending a lot of money to buy out a portion of the contract and yet experiencing significant savings that appear to start right away upon the start of that. Can you explain how the savings are so significant that they overcome this buyout cost?
That's a great question. And so what we have is that good of a replacement PPA from our RFP process through Crossover. So that brings the price down much lower than what we were purchasing previously, that we can then pull in and layer on top of the financing of that BDP on top of it to create those immediate savings. And that was a key thing that we were looking for as we evaluated these options. What was not on the table was something that created a rate hike for our customers for savings that would occur 20 years later. We needed to have something that showed, hey, here's some immediate benefit to our membership. And that was part of the role of what played into the 20-year determination as well. If we went with a shorter term, that was going to be much harder to generate those immediate savings. So that's why we picked that term. And now what wasn't shown on those graphs is what happens after year 20. After year 20, when we finish paying off that buy down payment, then we're looking at even more significant savings, considerably more savings, because we no longer have that buy down payment that we're making at that time. So that's why we just have that good of a PPA to offset that cost and then some.
Here's a related question, Dan. This is from Britt. Isn't the 7 million average annual savings not counting the payoff of the loan needed to finance the buyout?
It includes the payoff of the loan needed to finance the buyout.
All right. Here is another one from Ellen. This is a great question. I was hoping someone might bring this up so we could say it pretty clearly, because I know we get this question. How can either LPEA or TriState make a decision without having FERC approval of the formula? Isn't there a lot of uncertainty yet about that formula?
You know, I'm getting nervous about how close this is getting to FERC negotiations under Rule 606 that we highlighted. So,
But any part of that you can answer, Graham?
I mean,
Graham, why don't you explain what that
Mhm.
rule is so that people understand
Yep.
what you're referring to?
yeah, so Dan showed a slide of Rule 606 that indicated, it was of course the full citation, but it gets truncated down to the very last couple of digits, 606B, which basically says that conversations about whether or not FERC settlement conversations basically are not open for disclosure as per FERC rule. So we really have to be careful of how close we get to the actual terms of any sort of FERC discussion of the settlement details.
Thank you.
Here's one from Mark. When do you anticipate FERC reviewing and approving the settlement?
Ooh, reviewing might be an easier question to answer than approving. We're hoping in the next month to have something over to FERC. Then the approval side of it is a little bit more of an unknown. Graham, do you have any insight on that?
No, I don't at this time. You know, it really is, FERC is a regulatory agency that kind of gets to move at its own pace. We don't have a lot of levers to pull to force a faster resolution out of FERC, as just sort of the way a litigant wouldn't be able to force a court to rule quickly. We can't really force FERC to rule quickly.
And actually, if I could jump in here for a second, since Graham, you didn't get introduced at the beginning, for some people who might be joining us for the first time. Who are you?
Yes, thank you, John. My name is Graham Smith. I am LPEA's in-house attorney, but we do also have some expert FERC attorneys that are helping shepherd us through this, and they have relayed the importance of FERC Rule 606 to me on several occasions.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, Dan, here's one from John. Would we maintain the peak hour off hour rates?
That's another good question. So yes, the short answer is yes, we would. In fact, there'll be even, I see more emphasis that can be placed on that. What this partial contract is allowing is that crossover will be supplying the base of our load. We still have the same peaks and valleys that we've always had. And that we still want to maintain emphasis and focus on to levelize those out as much as possible, because when we're paying TriState rates for the remainder of our load, that is still based on our peak demand. And so we want to be able to control that the best we can.
All right, here's a question from Darcy. And she says, first, yay, thank you. You mentioned 1 million for grants. Over what time period? Is that per year in the 20-year period, or once in the 20-year period? And for what types of projects, and how would those funds be used?
Yeah, good question, Darcy. On that one in particular, there are a lot of rules to be written around that. It'll actually be in somewhat of a separate agreement. There's been proposals out there. It won't be stretched out over as long as 20 years, but I don't expect it all to come in on the first year either. And so we'll be writing those rules around that pretty soon. And the key part of that is it was very clear that it's LPEA's discretion on how those get used. It was, there is mention of education being tied to that as well, which is what we would like to be able to focus on as well.
All right, I was just checking the comments inbox, but nothing there so far. So we'll keep going with these in the Q&A. Question from Laura, is the partial buyout scenario, in the partial buyout scenario, what would be LPA's contractual allowance for self-generation? And would LPA be interested in increasing self-generation going forward?
Well, the way I look at it is this entire 50% is self-generation. You know, that is our ability to go out there and choose the types of projects that we want to integrate into our generation portfolio there. Now, we have specifically placed minimum amounts on what will be located locally inside the service territory of La Plata Electric. We're aiming for at least 20 megawatts to be accommodated within our service territory. I think it's going to be potential for being much larger than that. We have a lot of good opportunities that are sitting out there that we'll be evaluating. And what was the other part of that, Hillary? I'm sorry, it went away.
Sorry, I did send it away. Let me see if I can find it.
So I remember if there was a second part to that question.
It's in
This
the
is
answer.
It's like when I clean up my partner's coffee cup before he's finished drinking it.
Let me scroll
There we
down. Well, if we didn't cover everything, maybe she could.
Oh, and would we be interested in increasing self-generation going forward? That was the second part.
Okay. And yeah, and I do want to iterate the ability and the optionality that this contract does have in it is unlike anything we've obviously ever had before. We have options in there for what we call distributed generation, which are more community size solar arrays. We have options for larger scale utility size generation that might be sized or placed on our system. And there's also options in there to make what's referred to as a virtual power plant, where we're using more distributed energy resources that might be a combination of rooftop solar with battery banks behind the customer's meter and electric vehicles and smart thermostats, water heaters, all being controlled in a fashion that makes it look just like a generation resource. So these kind of options do exist within that contract. We're trying to scope out some of those. The more that we can be upfront and saying, yeah, this is the path we want to take, the easier that is to integrate. But even if we don't have our minds made up immediately, there are still provisions within the contract for us to take advantage of any opportunities that might pop up in the future as well.
Great. So I have a two-part question, part for us, part for TriState. Hopefully, Pat, you're hanging in there with us. This is from Mark, and he said, hi there, and thanks for the presentation. The solar question for LPEA is, with the partial or the full buyout, will the solar production cap be lifted, now set at 5% from the old contract? And can you address CSG and if when these will be allowed?
Okay. So I want to clear one thing up here. There is, Killer, if you can leave that question up there just for a
I'm
little
going to
while.
leave it. I promise.
Right. So there is I want to clarify what the 5% is. The 5% is our ability, LPA's ability to put self-supplied generation onto our system. Now, when solar is behind a customer's meter and it's net metered, that does not go towards the 5%, unless I will say it's over generating well above and beyond what the house needs. And so there's not really a cap on solar, on net metered solar, but there is a cap on what LPA can go and install itself. That's what this 50% is really about, that we have the ability to go do. So really the 5% is just expanded to 55%. On top of that, we also have the 2 megawatts of community solar that we were able to get ability to do from TriState, which sort of speaks to your CSG aspect, and CSG is community solar gardening. And so with that 2 megawatts, it's been designated as a community solar type of configuration. So we're looking forward for doing that type of thing and allowing customers to subscribe. And what that allows you to do is, instead of maybe saying you're taking LPA's supply, which I feel will be which is going to be extremely green once this all occurs, you may want to say, yeah, but I want to be 100% local solar. And so that's what a community solar garden might allow you to do, would allow you to do, would be to say, well, instead of taking LPA's mix, I want to say I'm 100% local solar because I want to subscribe to this solar garden over here. So some ability of that coming as well.
All right, and the second part of Mark's question was for you, Pat. Can you expand on the renewables that TriState's working towards and maybe give some percentages and dates?
Yeah, sure, be glad to. TriState is currently in the development process for a number of large renewable projects. I say we're contracted to third parties to do that. Today, roughly 30% of the kilowatt hours that we sell to our members comes from renewable resources. Looking into the future, as some of these new projects come online in 2024, we anticipate about 50% of that energy coming from renewable. And then you go to out to 2030, and it gets up to 70+% from renewable.
Great. Thank you, Pat. Another question from Karen. You may have kind of already answered this, Dan, but I'll read it aloud anyway. Is there a chance that the 5% limit on residential solar could be lifted to allow more co-op member owner participation, whether individually or with solar gardens? I think you did address that in the last.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there is no limit on residential solar.
Great.
That is definitely a big misnomer that floats around out there. And so definitely want to be clear on that.
Okay. And the next one is from Philip. Can you tell us more about the 2 megawatts of solar renewable energy build? Who owns it? Where will it be built? What is the time frame for bringing it online?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are good questions. Although we have some ideas of where we'd like to put this, I don't want to make any promises at this point. We have a lot of good opportunities that we are looking at right now. Got to make sure we can get everything through permitting and make sure that the site works as well as we expect it to before we make any announcements on where that might go. But I'm hoping that within the next couple of years, we will have something on the ground to show everybody, and I want to make that in a nice visible spot that people in Durango and our service territory in Pagosa Springs as well can see that LPEA is committed to moving forward with solar there.
All right, next one is from Marty. Can you explain how this arrangement helps accelerate the total amount of renewable energy being built? Not just getting LPEA a new renewable energy percentage in our power supply, but the bigger picture of renewable electricity generation overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Marty. The key here is that we aren't just taking power from renewable resources that are sitting out there already and subscribing to that. These are going to be new builds on La Plata Electric's behalf. That's sort of why I'm thinking January 2024, because by the time we get the agreements in place, it still has to be constructed to provide this to us. So this absolutely helps clean the grid by replacing one form of energy with the product that we're installing to serve and be designated to La Plata Electric.
Great. Here's just a comment from Britt, who's a previous board member. Congrats to all for your ongoing efforts to get this so close to happening. I, for one, am proud of LPEA. Thank you, Britt. Candace, what's in scope of the FERC approval? Can some part of the arrangement with crossover move forward, or is everything contingent on FERC approval? Are all of LPEA, crossover, and TriState committed to keep the deal as long as FERC may take?
Hillary, if you don't, or Dan, if you don't mind, I'll answer that. So the scope of FERC approval is the settlement agreement between La Plata Electric and TriState. So it doesn't really involve the crossover portion of this, but it has to be in place in order to open up that portion of our contract with TriState to effectively convert it from a whole requirements contract to a partial requirements contract.
Great. Here's a question from Dick. What happens to the money contributed to our monthly bills for local renewables?
That's another good question. So with that, for those that aren't aware of it, La Plata Electric does have a program for a local renewable generation fund, whereby a member can voluntarily say, I want to contribute a certain dollar amount of my electric bill to go towards this fund. That fund is yet another source for La Plata Electric to build renewable projects with. In the past, we built projects on top of schools, Habitat for Humanity type projects, and that is sitting in a fund today that grows every time a customer contributes to it. And then on an annual basis, the board looks at the fund and says, okay, do we want to open this up for grants? And we could open up for grants, or we could just say La Plata Electric has a project in mind, but it definitely gets used to build new renewable generation as the single purpose for that fund. And so we look forward to probably most likely could use it to expand an additional solar garden that might be going out there, or we like to have these more community focused type projects where we can use funds like that as well.
Great. And this is the last question we have in the queue for now, at least, from Nancy. When TriState talks about renewable energy, they now generate and will be generating, how much of that includes hydropower? That's another question for you, Pat.
Yes, thank you. And I'm speaking somewhat here from memory, don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but TriState has bought hydropower from the federal government since our founding, 70 years ago. Today, and there's still some smaller projects as well, but a rough number, I think, is roughly 1/3 of our current renewable supply comes from those federal hydro projects. The rest comes from the wind and solar projects that are we've done in just the past decade.
Great. All right, another question from Diana. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, how will we be ensured we have electric service? Battery storage is expensive and the bulk of the board does not seem to support people like me.
So lots of parts of that question there. And one of the key things that I think is very unique with this product that Crossover is providing to La Plata Electric is that we might have a block, a 71 megawatt block of power that we're trying to build. That doesn't mean I'm going to have 30 megawatts of solar and 41 megawatts of wind. That might mean I have 100 megawatts of solar and 100 megawatts of wind that we're essentially overbuilt for. Although we're only going to be taking 71 megawatts in total from those projects, and the rest, if there's surplus above and beyond the 71 megawatts, will be Crossover's responsibility then to possibly sell back into the market. But it assures that La Plata Electric has access to solar electricity at times when it might be partly cloudy outside, and it's just reduced production. Now, of course, at nighttime, it doesn't matter. It's not going to be producing anything then for sure. And there will be times when, you're right, the sun isn't shining and the wind's not blowing. Luckily, they tend to complement each other pretty well, that when the sun doesn't shine, the wind does blow, but doesn't mesh one for one by any means. That's why there's another part to this equation. It's also part of the Crossover Energy Partnership, includes the firming service. And so they have partners with other people that have more dispatchable resources. That's why we can't say we're going to be 100% renewable, because right now there are still resources out there, natural gas type generation, that will be there to firm the power that La Plata Electric is getting from these other renewable resources. Then there's also going to be market purchases. When the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow in La Plata Electric service territory, it likely is in another service territory. And so that's why this is all formed into the grid. It feeds into the market, and you have a high penetration of renewables to pull from out there. Energy storage is a part of what we're looking at. It's certainly not going to cover all of the firming services that are out there, but it is part of some of these project proposals to include that, and that'll balance out some of the highs and lows that come and go with the day there. But it's important. It's obviously important that you have to have dispatchable generation in the mix, and new technologies coming around that towards that every day.
All right, one more question from Winston. Where is Crossover's current electric producing plant located today?
Crossover has a lot of facilities all throughout the United States. Some are in Colorado, some are in other states. This will be facilities that we're talking about building here would be built straight for La Plata Electric. So there's not just one plant. I guess there's lots that they have spread throughout.
All right, with that, I will kick it back over to you, John. That was our last question.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for everybody coming out and your thoughtful questions and comments. Those were awesome, substantive, constructive, super grateful for everybody's participation. So I want to remind everybody that we keep a running list of Q&As on this topic, and we publish it on our website at lpa.coop/power supply. So you can find it there. If you still have questions, please email us at comments@lpa.coop. Or you have follow-up questions. We really want to hear from you. We want to make sure that everybody's questions are answered. For those of us that have been immersed in this process, we're super excited about the outcome. And I think the more that you know about the specifics and the details of what's happening, the more excited you'll be as well. As a registrant of this event, you'll also receive an email with links to the meeting and recording. If some of this happened very quickly and you want to follow up, you'll also get a copy of the slide deck. You're welcome to join our board meeting next week, where we will vote on a path forward. It's on Wednesday, February 16th at 9 a.m. It's on Zoom. You can register on our website. Just go to the About Us tab and select LPEA Board of Directors Meetings and Resources. So with that, in the absence of any additional questions or comments from anybody else, I would like to thank you all. And again, have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Goodbye. Good night.